So great to be back here at Central, see friends from many decades back still being faithful, and thank you so much for this invitation. And today, I'd just like to encourage you to think about how God orchestrates things in our lives, how God can use rhythms, how God can use notes, how God can use any combination of things to help us understand what He's doing in our lives and what He desires to do in our lives as well. And so throughout the message, you'll hear some music going on. I hope it doesn't distract you. I hope it helps you understand what is taking place in God's orchestration in our lives. So we're going to look at Philippians 1:6 to begin. Being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. When I look at these verses, when I see He that who began a good work, I think of sheet music, which is a work that can take an incredible amount of time. And so when I see that God began a good work in us, I see these notes, I see rhythms, I see different things that take place in our lives that make us who we are. The notes in my life in the beginning were not the most beautiful notes. But still, because of who I am and because who my family is, I've begun to understand a little bit more about these notes. My name's Jeff Phillips, and this is Kathy. If you guys were here for Oceans of Grace, we are their parents. So they were here just recently and had a wonderful time. So we live with musicians all of the time. And they get inspired at the most ungodly hours. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, you'll hear a guitar or a piano or some rhythm going. But it's amazing how it comes out and how that music just has influenced us. So again, I go back to saying what orchestration means in my life and how I interpret it through these verses. I grew up with alcoholic parents, so some of those first notes, some of those initial rhythms were quite violent. Fights every night, wondering if we should call the police because of what was going on. And I have two brothers that are older, 12 years older and 8 years older. So when I was 6 years old, my oldest brother left and never came back to live with us. My other brother, who was 8 years older, just saw how much I suffered. So he'd take me to his mini market where he worked on weekends and shared his salary with me. He'd take me to the library at night so we'd get home after the fights whenever possible. I mean, this guy was so cool. He would take me out on his dates. There's a special brother right there. An 8-year younger brother on a date. But, you know, he didn't want to go to Vietnam, so he went into the Coast Guard when I was 12 years old, and my life just went very badly. I started using drugs at the age of 12 just to deal with all the pain as a painkiller in my life. And you know, you start out just smoking weed, you know, and you go, well, at least when you're loaded, it doesn't seem to hurt so bad. So it was my painkiller. But those of you who have ever gotten involved with drugs know that you'll meet somebody that has a stronger drug. And this is even better for your pain. So for the next 3 years, I basically took anything that was offered. And it just got stronger and stronger until one weekend at a party, a friend came up to me and he goes, hey, Jeff, how about if we shoot up next weekend? And he was using heroin. And he was like walking death, this guy. His veins were just black. And I thought about it, and I thought about my life. I thought about my parents, and I go, if I'm going to grow up to be like my parents, I don't care if I die of an OD. And so I said yes. But then you see how God's orchestration takes place in your life, and out of the blue, my grandmother shows up. And she goes, Jeff, next weekend is Mother's Day, and you never give me a present, you dog. So remember that, grandmas and grandpas. So I'm thinking chocolates, I'm thinking flowers. I go, anything you want, Grandma. And she gets this smile. She goes, I want you to go to church with me. And I go, oh no. Set up by my grandmother. This sweet lady, I trusted her. And I started sweating because I go, if I go to church, God will kill me. I will just walk in the door, just my toe will cross, and a lightning bolt will come down, and I'll be dust. Because I really thought God was not pleased with my lifestyle. And so as the week got closer, it got to be Friday, and I had to make a decision. Okay, do I go to this party or I go to church? So I go, okay, here's my options. Die of an overdose or be killed by God. Well, if God kills me, then he's in trouble, right? It's his fault. And so I decided to go to church. And this was in Portland, Oregon, a little church, Christian church in Portland, Oregon. And I asked God to never let me forget that day. I walked in there and I saw the love of God for the first time in my life. And I did not know what to do. I just had my mouth open, I think, the whole service. And as I was walking out, because I was really messed up, I went, okay, this was Mother's Day. I'm coming back next Sunday and I'm going to catch them because they can't always be like this. So I come back the next Sunday and they're exactly the same. And I go, so it wasn't Mother's Day. They behave this way all the time. And some of my friends from grade school came up to me. They'd come into the kingdom that I'd lost contact with, and they said, Jeff, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I came with my grandmother. And they said, oh, you got to come to a youth meeting on Wednesday night. Sunday mornings aren't even cool. And I go, really? And I go, okay. And so I walk into this basement of the youth pastor, who was Jim Crane at that time. And I walk down there, and there's about 100 kids in this area about this big. And I'm looking at them, and I'm going, what planet are these people from? How can there be people so different than me? How can there be so much life, so much joy, so much love? And I'm just full of hate and anger and bitterness. And so I went, I'm coming back. So for the next 6 weeks, I never missed anything at that church. Sunday morning, back then there was a Sunday evening service as well. Then there was Wednesday night service, and then there was Bible study, and then there was youth meetings. I was at everything. And then about 6 weeks down, the youth pastor had this event. Now, I want you to know my definition of a good youth pastor. He's always in trouble with the elders of the church, okay? Always, like for all the crazy stuff he's doing, And so he had this, like, Christian Woodstock in this park where I used to be loaded all the time. And I'm just standing there in awe, watching everything. And a youth sponsor, who was an ex-druggie, comes up to me. You know how ex-druggies, they pick out druggies pretty easy. They just know. And I do too, and so I'm watching today, okay? I'm making a list for the pastor, okay? Turning it in at the end of the service. But he goes, Jeff, what do you think of all this? And I go, I just don't get it. These people are so different than me. And he goes, Jeff, it's easy. They have Jesus, and you don't. And I knew it was true. And so in that park where I used to destroy my life, I invited Jesus into my heart. And he said, you need to be baptized. And I said, I've seen some baptisms. I'm ready. Let's go. So we go walking out of this park, and a police car comes tearing down the street and stops right in front of me, and I just freeze. And they jump out and run by me, luckily. And everything just kind of goes into slow motion. I'm watching this, and all of a sudden, the police start pulling youth out of there. And it's a drug bust. And the Lord spoke to my heart for the first time and said, Jeff, this is what I'm saving you from. And he filled me with a peace for the first time. I knew that God loved me, even as messed up as I was. And so God began to orchestrate new things in my life, brought this whole series of new notes and a music of love and a music of compassion into my lives. But then I went home, and it was just as messed up as ever. And I was just dealing with all kinds of struggles of hatred and bitterness. And then I'd go to church, and Jim would say to the youth, kids, you need to honor and obey your parents. I go, I'm exempt. My parents are no goods. And he'd just look at me and go, Jeff, it's not about them. It's about you. It's about what God wants to do in your life. And so the kids started praying for me, and God began to orchestrate forgiveness and mercy and desire to see something better for my parents. And 6 months later, in that same little church, my parents came to Jesus. I then baptized my 2 older brothers, and I went, I can do this for the rest of my life. I am convinced if God can change me and my family, he can change anyone, and I will serve him forever. So 2 years later, young Christian went to San Jose Bible College, right here in San Jose. And God began to orchestrate new things. The first thing was some precious, beautiful music. Some of the best music I've ever heard from that young lady on the second row. And I fell in love with Kathy. And we began to date for 3 years. And we got married between our junior and senior year. And so we were getting ready for graduation. I still didn't have a clue what God wanted to do with us. We thought about Shiloh ministry in New York, teaching kids to read on the streets. And Kathy came up to me and said, Jeff, Woody Phillips, the president at that time's wife, Marge, just came to me and said, we've been in Chile and we think God can use you. And I started dragging my feet, saying Chile, Pinochet, dictator, 7,000 miles away. I don't know, I'm not so sure. And she'd just look at me and she'd go, Jeff, this is what you're all about. See, this was the balance I desperately needed. I grew up on the streets and drugs. She grew up in the church. And so it was that balance and that orchestration that God had for us once again. And so I made this dangerous statement after she said that. I said, if God opens the doors, we'll go. Very dangerous statement. Whoa. 3 months later, the day after our first wedding anniversary, we got on a plane for Chile with a whopping $300 a month pledged and a one-way ticket. And we've now been there 40 years. And we have 4 kids that were born there and 8 grandchildren. And you just see how God orchestrates so many incredible things in our lives. And he's involved. He's involved in our lives. And I just want to encourage you, what is God orchestrating in your lives at this very minute? What are the rhythms that could be changing? What are the new notes that God is bringing in? And so we find ourselves in Chile. And to tell you the truth, all of the musical ability in our family came from Kathy. I have 2 left feet. I can barely clap in time. And God's talking to me about orchestration, and adding new notes. 2 left feet, I can't dance, and it's a dancing culture. But God started to show me, your childhood, all that danger, all that fear. Well, it was in preparation for certain things, like living in Chile, martial law, curfews, people disappearing and never being found. There were mass executions in that country. And we lived under 13 years of that dictatorship. And so you begin to see how God orchestrates things in your life from the beginning. We began planting churches. We began seeing the church grow, and we had an invitation to Ecuador. And we go into Ecuador, and whole new set of music, whole new rhythms. We go into this town, 42 Chileans. We took all the youth to do missions up there. We met with a Christian organization of youth from the United States, 20 other kids. So we were over 60 people, and we rented one house with 2 bathrooms. That was a cultural experience right there. A lot of new notes, a lot of rhythm in there. What we didn't know was this week was the week of the patron saint of San Borondón, Ecuador. And they really do it up big. And so they get the statue at night and put it on their shoulders and march through the town. And the problem is, everybody is drunk out of their minds and have guns. And they're shooting in the air. And my response was, we're going to die. God, this is our first missions trip, and we're going to die. This was not what I had in mind. Learned something about physics. What goes up comes down. Those bullets started coming down, and you could just hear them hitting the tin roof of where we were staying. And so we would stay in at night, and the adults would just drink like crazy, and they'd be so hung over the next day that it would just be kids galore in the streets. And we just started loving on those kids. And we just started blessing them, and we'd do puppets, and we'd do mimes, and we'd do musical concerts. And as a result, there's 5 churches in that area over the period of time that took place. And so I saw how God was orchestrating things. And we would go up every 6 months with teams to help plant the churches. And we would always fly over Peru because there was a terrorist group there called the Shining Path. And they were bad news. These people would go into villages, execute everyone. They would stop buses on the highway and execute everyone. And so I was pretty clear that I never wanted to work there. We get to the border of Chile, getting ready to fly to Ecuador, but they say you have to cross the border tonight because you won't make your plane. And I went, that's not what we had in mind. But we went over, and we were low budget, so we just drove through the town. And God began to speak to me and said, I want to orchestrate something new in this town. And my response was, we're going to Ecuador tomorrow. And we got on the plane and took off. It went incredibly well up there, and so I said, see, God, Ecuador. We come back, we get stuck in that city again. Could not get across the border for another 24 hours. And I go, okay, I get this. We're never going to get to Ecuador unless we include Peru. So we took a team up there, and just incredible things started to happen in that area. God orchestrated things in an incredible way. The first open air event we did, it was just packed with people. And I was behind the truck on my knees saying, okay, God, I convinced this whole group to come up here. If you don't do something, your reputation is going to be damaged. So I went out, I shared my testimony and gave an invitation. About half of the plaza came forward, and I go, I understand this. If we're sensitive to your orchestration, you are willing to do incredible things among your people. We got there and started going back, and we found out this great thing about the Shining Path. This city is their vacation spot, and they hardly kill anyone there. They kill everyone up north, and so it worked out perfectly. We were fairly safe, and so I thought I'd figured this out. I said, we're going to do this in every Latin American country. We're just going to go from one to another, and I know your plan, God. Out of the blue, I find myself in northern Africa, in Morocco. 99% Muslim. And it happened to be the king's birthday when we were there. And they really celebrate their king's birthday. And so in the evening, they would just have all these live bands all over the plazas. And it was about 9 o'clock at night, and so under Islamic culture, all the women were in their homes. So there were about 2,000 men all dancing together. And I went, this is new. This is different. But as I watched these men dancing, the Lord just spoke to my heart again, and he said, Jeff, none of these people know Jesus. And I began to weep. It broke my heart. None of these men knew the Lamb of God. And so we began thinking about how God could be orchestrating something new with our movement. And in that same time period, I heard how God was using Latinos in Muslim countries. And it makes sense. Number one, Latinos are not from the United States, so they're not the enemy. You know, they're an oppressed people. They're a third world people. And so that barrier comes down. They live in community so well. Many of them look Middle Eastern. And so we began to consider that and began to say, God, what are you orchestrating for this new stage of our lives? And we find ourselves in Europe in 2003, in August of 2003, in this situation of a conference all about unreached people. And I'm listening to all this, and as we go out, and I was saturated to the max now. Had a headache, too much talking about unreached peoples. And somebody grabs me by the arm and said, Jeff, are you going to the meeting about Iraq? And I said, no. This was the year of the war. And so he goes, yeah, but you're talking about mobilizing Latinos into unreached people. And I'm thinking, not into Iraq. I'm not thinking that. But again, my wife, who is light years ahead of me, goes, well, let's go listen. And so we're in there, and they're saying, doors are open. The borders are down. Anybody can go into Iraq, good and bad. We need people that are willing to go for 6 months to fill the gap until we can get long-term workers into the country. And I look at my wife, and she goes, bags are packed. And so we began thinking about what God would do for us in Iraq. And we went back to Chile, where our lives are submitted to the Chilean church. And they prayed about it, and they said, this is of God, preach it. And 2 weeks later, we had a team of 12, 4 being our children, and 8 Chileans that went into northern Iraq in November of 2003. And I remember flying in to Iraq. We're doing a spiral descent in a small plane to avoid missiles, because a missile can't tag you when you're doing tight turns. And we land in the country. Of course, I thought as we were going down, spiraling down, we're dead. So it's kind of a theme of my life, you know. So we get there, and I collect all the passports, all 12 passports, and the international airport at that time was a container, metal container, with a hole cut in it. And so I take them up there, and I go, we're here and just love to get a visa stamp, you know, like we're legal. Not to worry, my friend. Welcome. We love you. But like anything, just a little something to show that we're supposed to be here? Not to worry, my brother. Come. So I'm going, oh, not good. And so we move into this city, and we all live together, because we were really doing this on a Latino budget. It was $1,200 a month. That's a big rent for Latinos. But when there's 12 of you, it's $100 a month, and that's doable. And the Kurds loved it. They would say, they'd come into our house, oh, you are a big family. You are Kurdish. We love you. And so we'd just hang out with them, and we began to have more and more people into our homes. And one of the first guys that we met had been trained under Al-Qaeda. He was a dark angry person. But he just kept coming back, and we made a friendship with him. And he happened to become the first follower of Jesus, then his best friend. And now there's about 15 followers in that area. That's a mega church for that part of the world, okay? But he would come to our home, and he'd look over the people that were, in our house, and he'd go, after they left, Jeff, do you know who you have in your house? And I go, oh, friends. You've got bad people in your house. Most Muslims are wonderful. It only takes one bad one. They're going to kill you. I go, it's okay. We have guards. And he'd go, he was trained. Where are your guards? I thought, we have so many guards. Where are they? They're angels. Oh my God. And of course his answer, you are going to die. But it was because of those acts of faith. It was because of walking in those positions that God began to do things. There's a verse in Corinthians that has become very important to me. You all know it well. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, and the new is here. Again, I interpret this as, I'm writing something new in your life. This creation, this orchestration, that past, you get a new chance. You get new notes. You get new things in your life. And so we begin to see how God orchestrates even the tough things in our lives. And I'm come to the point in my life now where some people will say, I'm so sorry for your past. And I truly can say I wouldn't trade my past for anything. I am who I am because of those dark times as well. That suffering has just given me compassion. That orchestration, I believe with all my heart, prepared me for Chile, then for Ecuador, then for Peru, then for Iraq. God has been actively orchestrating in our lives some precious things. In John 5:44 it says, how can you believe since you accept glory, which is praise, from one another, but you do not seek glory or praise from that comes from the only God? And I began to think, you mean God praises people? Did Jesus ever praise people? He did. Remember that verse that says, never have I seen such faith in all of Israel. He pointed someone out in the middle of a crowd. I've had people come up to me after speaking saying, Jeff, you are so brave. I really don't want to be known as brave. Extreme sports people are brave. They'll jump like 300 cars and make it to 299, That's brave, short-lived. I want to be known as faithful. I want to be known as obedient. Bravery can just get you into trouble, but faith and obedience can just do amazing things. I was an intern at this church. I was probably the least likely to succeed. I just know very well who I am. I know my limitations. But I know how God can orchestrate new things. And I know how he can take people that are obedient and faithful and orchestrate marvelous things for his glory and for his kingdom. I wanted to share one last verse, and again, we're going to hear a little bit of music. It comes from Revelations. It says, after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And they were wearing white robes, and they were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." This is how I see the final days before Jesus. There will be an amount of people so large that no one can count them. And this sheet music that has been started before time has been written by the great conductor, Jesus Christ. And he has been orchestrating things throughout all of history. And there will come a day when he will stand before all those who have been purchased by his blood. And he will raise his hands and worship will begin. And worship will continue for all eternity. Missions will end, church will end, but worship of the Lamb will go on forever and ever. God has allowed us to orchestrate and see so many precious things. Here in the States, Latin America, there are now 27 churches. We have workers in Iraq, and we have workers in Africa. We have built over 150 wells, and there are churches being planted among the unreached people group. God has orchestrated this. We are eternally thankful for Central Christian, who has walked with us for 40 years. And this orchestration will only grow. May you be aware as a church of how God is orchestrating for his glory among you. God bless you. Thank you so much.